You're visiting the Mom Next Door and our stories of faith. I'm glad you dropped by for a visit. Please stay a while and hear what the Lord has done in the lives of moms just like you and me. Hi friends, I'm glad you joined us again. Before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to give you a little disclaimer for the technology glitches. When I listened back to the recording, I realized that we had quite a few knocks on the doors and noises in the next room, as happens with mom life. And so there may be a couple spots where the recording kind of got chopped and put back together. And my apologies, but I am learning how to edit and do all of that. And so I am not a professional, just the mom next door, right? Just like you. So anyway, apologies for that. And I also realized after we stopped talking that it was Molly who gave the name to my blog and my Instagram and all that. When a few years ago I said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a blog. What in the world would I call it? And Molly is the one who came up with the name Tending Fields. So anyway, that's just a fun fact. I also want to let you know that this episode covers some pretty extreme sexual abuse. And so you probably want to step away where you have some privacy to listen to this or put your earbuds in. So let's just jump right into where we started recording. Having this podcast has given me a reason to put meeting together with friends on my calendar. And I just love talking to other moms, and I love being online and talking to other moms. So if you need a group of ladies that you can chat with, come look for us over at the Facebook group called Less Than Perfect Christian Mamas. And we would love to see you there. Today's guest is not only in that group with me, but she was a connection I had in Oregon when we were living there, and I've known Molly for a very long time. I want to start out by telling you about this book that I've been looking at today. I have a friend named Rachel Reisner who has written a book called Significant: 6 Ordinary Women, One Extraordinary God. I was looking at the table of contents just now. Sarah, Leah, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba. These lives were really messy. If you go and read those accounts, I just went through this book this year, and it just reminds me what a mess life can be, even in Bible times. There was sin and tragedy all over, but yet these are the very women that were in the line of Christ. And so I just thought that was an encouragement that no matter where we come from, no matter how messy our lives have been, God can use it for his purpose and for his glory. And so we're going to be talking about some of that messy stuff today when life gets messy.
Yes.
So Molly, why don't you just take a second and introduce yourself, whatever you'd like to tell everyone.
So I usually start with just a small snippet of my salvation story. I grew up in the church. My parents didn't attend, but they made sure that we did. And they had both been baptized. And so I'm not in a position, and nor would I seek to judge their salvation. But it was important to them that we went, but they didn't necessarily go. And so they also didn't model Bible reading or devotionals. But I grew up in the church, and I never even really, I had very much so a childlike faith, right? So I don't remember a time where I didn't believe in God, right? And I don't remember a time where I thought that, the creation story was just a myth, or that the Bible was just a book of, moral stories. I mean, I believe that Jesus Christ was my Lord and Savior. And I mean, that was my background. And there were some things that I learned in the church that really weren't biblically sound. So, for example, I don't know, I probably asked Jesus into my heart, right? I accepted the free gift of salvation probably, I would say, thousands of times, because I was very much so told that things would be very different. And I'm also a pretty literal thinker. So, when people say that Jesus would be your rescue, I was very much so thinking that I would be rescued from a pretty difficult situation. And it just didn't happen. And I was kind of just taught that if I didn't have a Paul on the road to Damascus moment, where I got, blinded, and you have this very things become extremely different in your life, then you don't have the Spirit. And that's not biblical. Like, we don't find that. I mean, there are plenty of people that have that kind of conversion story where their life turns around, but there are also plenty of people that don't, right? So I questioned my own salvation, and I assumed that I was asking for salvation incorrectly or praying wrong. And I just kept praying, and things just got, more difficult from there. So my dad, as a kid, he doesn't anymore, and I want to be super careful about being accurate. He drank a lot. He worked hard, often 3 jobs. So he drank in his downtime, and not like an abusive drunk, but like I drank too much and I passed out on the floor kind of, not always emotionally present, not aware. And it doesn't mean that we didn't have good times as a family, but that created a security risk later. And my mom really struggled with depression, and it just didn't maybe have all of the coping skills that you would hope that you would have as a healthy, well-adjusted adult. So, fast forward several years, I'm the youngest of 3. I'm in middle school, and my uncle comes to live with us, and he is a convicted sex offender. And this is before the registry was in place. So he's finished everything that he has to do. He's out of prison now. And I feel like this information is key, and that it impacts me today still. But I want to be super clear that I support law enforcement, particularly in this particular climate. But he was also, like, he'd been kicked off the force. He was the sheriff's deputy, and actually not a full-time, he was just a reserve. So he'd gotten kicked off the force, was convicted of sex abuse, and then did his prison stint, finished his parole, and then nobody was checking up on him. And that was, at that time he came to live in our home. And there really wasn't any sort of discussion about that. But he was pretty determined to get what he wanted. And I was very much so the weakest link in the household, right? I was the youngest kid, and I became the prey, and he was definitely the predator. So, I mean, it just didn't work out for me, right? And I'm, praying and waiting for rescue, and it's not coming. And there are a lot of people that stepped up in that time that had no idea that what was going on. And I just lacked the language. I didn't have the words. And I knew what was going on was wrong, but I thought it was also, my fault. So I didn't want to tell anybody. And I knew that prostitution was illegal. I was petrified that I would get put into jail. So it just went from bad to worse. And he was also, like, I fell down more flights of stairs than anybody I know when we had a 1-story house. And which is to say that I never fell down any flights of stairs, but I lied about it a lot because that explained my physical injuries, right? And I have a screw in my humerus and a screw in my tibia. I've had 8 knee surgeries, 3 shoulder surgeries. It's easier to dislocate a joint than it is to break one, and incredibly painful and harder to track with child abuse laws. So, and I wish that it ended there, because honestly, the physical stuff it's easier to deal with than other things. And for those of you that are listening and thinking, wow, this is a horrible story. Why is she talking about this? Well, fast forward, I didn't used to share this. And I started because I was teaching at a private university, a Christian university. And I was feeling convicted that, one, I wasn't sharing my story. Every time anybody would ask, or if I had insight, and I knew where that insight came from, and they asked me how I got it, I never lied directly, but I definitely wasn't forthright or forthcoming. And you're constantly, I was just keeping people at arm's length. And in this particular semesters, the first semester that I taught there, I had a fractured tooth that was also thanks to my offender, and it had gotten infected, and it was making me sick. But it was also, the pain was really distracting, because it hurts like you just, been beaten or punched in the face, and that's just distracting because it's in the same place and it's the same quality, and you're trying to not let not dwell in the past, right? Like, that's not what's going on right now. That's not where I am. Yes, it hurts like that, but I need to be able to focus. And I could see that my teaching was suffering, and I dealing with these young adults. And I had a student that was less than gracious and complained about my performance to me. And like, she was right 100%. Now, she could have been kinder, but she was right 100%. And I decided that, in the same way that I would expect my students to say, hey, I have this thing going on and I need a little bit of grace. Can you extend it to me? That I should be treating them with that same courtesy. So I said to my students one day, like, look, this is what's going on. So I know that I'm discombobulated. I'm sick and it hurts and I'm sort of stuck here. And the reason I'm telling you that is, one, I'm just asking for your grace. And if you see me, like, I would be frowning a lot and look grumpy because I was hurting and ill. And I just wanted them to know that one, I love my job and I have a passion for teaching for students, but also that, it wasn't about them, right? It had nothing to do with them. And could they just extend me some grace? And the response to that was, I really, in the back of my head, I wondered, great, am I going to get fired, right? Because here I've just shared that I'm defiled and I've done these things, and is that going to get, how are people going to react to that? I didn't get fired. And what happened was students started coming forward and asking for help.
So you told your students not just my tooth hurts and I've been out of sorts, been having some hard physical things going on to extend me grace, but you actually told them also of your past history of abuse and how that tied in.
Yeah, I told them that I, had lived with a sex offender, and, understatement of the year, that I had a less than stellar childhood, right? Because if I'm going to tell them, then I just felt like, when I felt like they deserved to know, and anybody that has a trauma or abuse history or like PTSD, it's not like I'm having a psychotic episode. I know where I am, but it's like having a nightmare, except for it's not a nightmare. There isn't a boogie monster. There's an actual person that did actual evil things that you can't unsee and you can't unknow. And you just have to kind of learn to carry that well and not stay stuck in it, but working on moving forward. And I figured if I was going to say it, then I was going to give them all of the information, because, oh, my mouth hurts. Like, that was not why I was, I was jumpy in the classroom, I would say. And it's hard to describe. It's hard to describe with any amount of, I don't even have the right words. So I was trying to be concise and I couldn't. So I was having difficulty just even stringing my sentences together, because you see something out of the corner of your eye, and it really, what it did was take my hypervigilance, that's a very normal part of PTSD, and put it through the roof, right? So somebody would drop a pencil, and it was more than drop a pencil, but some sound that shouldn't have been there, or something, like I was constantly checking exits, things like that. So they could tell that there was something up. And I just felt like, one, they're paying customers, but it was way more than that, right? As a teacher, it's my job to be caring about them. I mean, it's literally my job. So I wanted them to know that I did care about them. And I wanted them to be able to come and talk to me if they needed help.
So that, what you're saying is, this opened a door to your students, which, if you think about this, I mean, as a parent, if I send my child to college on a campus, maybe thousands of miles from my home, Oh my goodness, what a blessing that is to my heart to know that there's an instructor there who my children feel safe with, who my child can approach and say, hey, there's this thing that's going on now, or there was this thing that happened in the past, and I really need to talk. And so that's what you're telling me, is that you, by being vulnerable in that moment where God just put on you to be vulnerable, it opened the door for conversations with young people.
Right. Absolutely. And I was way more more concise. I mean, I really told them, why did I become a teacher? And that was really in response to this one student that was holding me accountable, saying, I mean, what she said was, you don't even like teaching. You clearly don't like students. And it broke my heart, because that's just not true. And I just wasn't handling my business very well. Right. So I made my business public in a vague way, but I made it public so that they would know and could pray for me, because that's what it is to be in fellowship. And it was a Christian university, so I can have that expectation. But I also wanted them to understand that, look, I became a teacher because I had teachers in high school that, honestly, I don't think it's necessarily, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that they saved my life. Like, there were points that I wouldn't say that I was suicidal and that I wanted to die, because I really didn't, but I couldn't see how I could get out of that situation. I was viewed as the screw up. It started when I was in middle school, and I acted out because I, was dealing with this and didn't have the coping strategies, didn't know how to deal with it. So, I would curse at my parents, and it wasn't a fantastic situation. But just even things like, I had teachers who helped me complete college applications, and they paid the application fee for me. Yeah. So I just, I had been held accountable by this student, and it broke my heart that they thought that maybe I didn't like teaching, because I really became a teacher because I had teachers who had really poured into me in a completely wholesome, positive way. Right. I had a teacher, I spent a lot of time after school, even though I didn't need to, because school was safe and home was not. And he would write things like, you matter. He'd put my name on the board and say, you matter, what you do matters. You can do this. I had teachers pay for my application to go to college, because I hadn't planned on that, because to me, I had absolutely no self-worth or value. I thought that God didn't want me, because I'm still praying, multiple times a day. And every time there's an abuse incident, that just please, I'm begging for salvation and rescue, and thinking that the promises of the Bible weren't necessarily for me. And those teachers taught me, lots of things. And I even had a teacher give me his phone number, and that's like, people are like, oh, that's not good. But it was in that he just said, don't do anything stupid. If you think you're going to do something stupid, then just call. And I did call him once, and it was probably at like 2 a.m. It was after a particularly horrible incident with my offender. And I just thought, I can't stay here anymore. Like, either he's going to kill me, or I'm going to end up killing myself. But I don't want to kill myself. I just want this to stop happening. And I didn't have the language to be able to express things. And so I did say, to a person once, can I please tell the police what he's doing so that they can make them stop? And I was told no. There weren't questions asked. It wasn't a conversation. It was like, absolutely not. He's already been to jail. What are you even talking about? And he had a daughter, a 3-year-old daughter that was also living with us. And so what about her? They'd take her away and put her in the foster care system. You're just being selfish. And I don't know if it was just avoidance and denial on that, I'm not going to name names, but on that individual's part, thinking that, maybe I was just talking about some random disagreement, but there weren't questions asked. And so I did not ever ask again. It was very clear to me that this was my lot, and I was going to have to deal with it. So that was really when I started sharing publicly, because I had a student that, just, it really did break my heart, because I really do have a heart for students. It's why I became a teacher, because I wanted to be able to pay it forward, as it were. So I would then invite my students, because one of the reasons that for me it went on for so long, middle school all the way through high school, it didn't stop until I moved out. I mean, I went to college and I just never came back. I didn't have the language, I didn't know how to even talk about it. In some respects, you start to convince yourself that it's just normal and it's your fault. I didn't have the tools to be even able to have a conversation about it. So I just wanted my students to know that, they could consider the conversation started. Because I still believe that if somebody had asked me, if somebody's hurting you, can I help you with that? I think if somebody had been direct like that, I would have said yes, because I had been waiting for that. Like, I was waiting for that sort of rescue. And so I didn't know how to bring it up, and I didn't know how to even talk about it. So I really didn't want that to be any of their stories, right? And if you want to be super careful about this, we have a tendency to compare and compete excessively, particularly in the United States. This is not a tragedy Olympics, right? People do not get extra points for having a worse or better or whatever story. Like, it's all awful. There's no comparing abuse or hard situations. And I just wanted them to be able to get help if they needed it. And what I saw, and the reason I'm sharing today, was just more than anything else in my entire, teaching career and volunteering in the church, was that students came forward and wrote, snail mail, hard copy notes to say that changed my life and made it so that I could go get help. Because there's still so much shame around physical and sexual abuse. There just is. And we don't want to talk about it. Even in the church, we don't want to talk about it. And it's uncomfortable and it's hard. And I know that. I know that very well. But I am convinced that the only way to make a serious dent in it is to start having those really hard conversations. And I hesitate in any way, shape, or form to paint myself as anything other than a screw up, right? But for the grace of God, right? But those students saw me as, an adult who'd been married 20 some years, who is a professional. I'm teaching at a university. I like my job. My kids are healthy. So to them, I'm a success, right? And I have this, closet full of dirty laundry, that, quite a lot of baggage. And so it makes them think that, okay, this is possible. That's a chapter in my story. It's not the title of my book, kind of a situation. And so that's really my thing, is transparency, right? We as a community of Christians, and it does not have to be sex abuse, but we need to just be more open and willing to struggle publicly, because we just, we've really seen that with COVID too, with the number of, mental health things skyrocketing. It's because of isolation, and people think that they're alone or unique in that struggle. And I'm not saying that your struggle doesn't matter or that it's not hard, but you are definitely not alone, because everybody has something. And if more of us were brave and courageous to just take that step to talk about it, it sort of opens up the floodgates for everybody else to have permission to do it too. And then I've already had a conversation about that hard topic, and it's so much easier for them to, the door's already open. All they have to do is walk through, sort of a thing. So I really want people to be transparent and open in a safe way. I mean, obviously I don't share this story with a group of kindergartners, but the fact is that we live in a fallen world that can look really awful sometimes, and we have a tendency to look away. And honestly, I have to look away sometimes, right? That's the coping mechanism of thinking about what is true and right and beautiful and praiseworthy. But I also you can't ignore the suffering. As horrible as it is, I can say that time teaching at that university helped it come full circle. And I feel incredibly blessed that, the Bible doesn't say that we won't struggle, because we will. In fact, it guarantees us that we will. But it does say that God will use it for his good and his glory. And I got to see a glimpse of that, because there's this whole period of time, over 20 years, that I'm thinking, what possible good could come from this? Well, I have students that needed suicide intervention counseling, and students who had previously had a drug abuse problem and could see that they were headed down the wrong path, but didn't think that they'd be accepted in the Christian community if they were open about really struggling with staying clean. And if their professor can talk about surviving life with a sex offender and prostitution, and that seems to take the load off of them to be perfect.
I think, well, let's see. How would I say this? There's a timeline involved with all this, right? There's the things that happened when you were young. And then there was this long period, like you mentioned, 20 years. You have had time to work through this and to grow in your faith. And this is why we call it a journey of faith, right? Or our walk with the Lord, because it is a continual thing of growing and learning more about him, which does give us this foundation and put us in a solid place. But it does take time and over and over learning his truths, having other people speak. You're telling me that there were people that spoke truth into you that helped make you grounded. So here you are, decades later, able to pour into other people. And I think that's your heart of why you wanted to talk to the ladies today. We are not a teenager or children podcast. We are mostly women in their, I'm going to guess, I don't know, what are my listeners are like mid-20s to 60 or so, and mostly women. And what we need to hear from you is, number one, to be bold, to be vulnerable, and to speak to other women or young people, because that may give them the courage to step up, right? So we need to be vulnerable with our lives. I see you nodding.
Yeah, no, we have a lack of transparency. And social media can be an amazing thing. In fact, on your page, I asked a question in the last 24 hours, and I got some really great feedback. We just had a bit of an internet conundrum, and my husband and I were like, well, what do we do about this? We want to protect our marriage and be very proactive in that, but we also want to be able to witness to others, and where's the line here? And so I asked a question, and I got some really amazing feedback. And I learned something about a particular social media platform, and we worked it out. So that is the good of social media, right? Or, I can't tell you how many times my husband and I have saved serious amounts of money because I watched video after video after video of somebody fixing my particular washing machine. And so then when he got home, I knew how, and we used my brains and his brawn, and we fixed it, and we didn't have the money to go buy one, so there's some amazing things about it. But it can also be horrible in so many ways. I mean, the internet's used for sex trafficking, and predators are aplenty on there, and they're really good at grooming kids, and we frequently aren't even aware that that's happening. And screen time, the more time you spend on a screen, the higher stress levels, the more anxiety you have in general, the less the less well you are. I guess it's not spending more and more time on a screen is bad for your health, and there's plenty of data out there. But the thing that I really am after is this idea that, and I'm sure people have done it. In fact, I did it. I did it while I was preparing to chat with you. I cleared up my bookcases that are appearing behind me in this video so that it would appear nice, right? And people take 1,000 pictures before they get it just right, or they apply these filters. And that is not real life. It's no one's real life, because life is messy. And, I'll say this again, we live in a fallen world. God's plan was Eden, which does not mean that God's not in control, but he gave us free will. We chose badly. We ate from the tree of knowledge, and now we have sin that we have to live in. But what God made, if we go back to the Bible and we read in Genesis, it was good and holy and right. Over and over, he made it and it was good. He made it and it was good. And we introduced sin, and that has some real, serious consequences. And so people really need that transparency. And we all know that, but we all still clean up our bookcases before we take the picture and,
Well, I will have you know that we are here in my closet in the guest room, and there are clothes hanging up on the hangers. Somebody's staying here with us, and I was like, hey, I know I told you the closet was yours and the guest room was yours while you're staying, but I need it this afternoon. So anyway, yeah. And the listeners won't ever see this video because I just used the audio portion. So you didn't
Right.
even have to clean up your bookcases. No one would ever know.
Right. And I knew that, and I still did it. Right. Like it's so ingrained in us. And we do, if you think about how birthday parties were when you and I were kids versus what people do now on Pinterest. And I'm not judging. Okay. We don't need to, I'm not judging.
You go
It's
there
fine.
to get good ideas, right?
But if you look at the kind of the expectations and it's like there's a food stylist there. You know what I mean? Like it's just crazy high level. Whereas back in the day, you had a bag of ice cream that in plastic cups with a little wooden spoon and cupcakes, and you went outside and played, and that was just fine. And we've just changed that expectation so much.
So one thing you kept saying was that you didn't have the language to explain what was going on with you. And I guess as we kind of move along in this, how can we do that? Now you're a mom and you are getting ready to pass the baton from being your daughter's protector and your children. I mean, we have to say this could be an issue for boys too, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it is. And we would be lax in our protection of our children if we thought that our boys couldn't also be victimized. They can, and they are. And so it's the last stat that I knew, it's 1 in 3 girls by the time they're 18 and 1 in 4 boys. And that's any abuse. It's not just sexual abuse. And it could even I don't want to say it could be harassment, or it could be as bad as, human trafficking and the higher end of that. But it happens to boys. It happens to girls, and we need to stop looking away because that's not helping our kids.
So I just had Dr. Corey Gilbert, on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we did kind of talk about some of these issues about talking about sexuality with our children, but his perspective is obviously going to be different because he's a dad. So you, saying that you just did not have the language then, and being a mom now and preparing your own children to have the language, what would you say is a good, if you're talking to a young mom, what can we do?
Number one, and I'm gonna say words that people may not like. We call body parts by their biologically appropriate anatomy, physiology words. So like we use the word penis if we need to talk about penis and labia and vagina and whatever it is. And like, there's no day that we sit down and have a doll and point it. That doesn't happen. But at some point, you're changing your kid's diaper and something's super messy and they ask you what you're doing. And when you answer, you say, well, you've got poo all over your penis, dude. I'm just, getting it off. Or they come and tell you that a particular body part hurts and they don't have the word for it. Well, I tell them what the word, I give them the actual appropriate word, because that at least gives them a base of, God forbid, they have something to report. Like if they start telling me that somebody's been touching their penis or their vagina or their labia, then I automatically know, oh, timeout, right? And we've always used those words. And in a nonchalant sort of way. I mean, little boys touch themselves all the time, right? That's a hallmark of being a little boy. And so we would say, hey, buddy, hands off your penis, right? You can't play with your, and other people, call them 101 other things, but privates is not particularly descriptive if you're ending up trying to give somebody information about abuse.
Right. So you're talking about a relationship too. I mean, it's not, so the verbiage and having the words is part of it, but I think also just giving permission to speak about things that are typically not spoken about.
Right.
There are times and places to speak of these things, and there's people that are safe to speak to. So it's not just a one thing, like you said, you're not just picking up a doll and pointing at it. There's a lot of things we can do as a parent to prepare our children and to protect them and to care for them. And this is just one more component that we should be thinking of.
And I mean, for us, for my family, now my offender is dead of natural causes, right? He's drank a lot and did a lot of drugs, and eventually that had caught up with him. But there was a period of time where my extended family absolutely did not shun him in any way, shape, or form. And so we would have a family get together and my family didn't go because I have no desire to spend time with my sex offender. And I have absolutely no desire to introduce him to my children, to introduce him into a potential target. I wasn't interested in doing that at all. But when my kids would ask me, they're not ready for that information at 3. But at 3, I can say, well, this person is going to be there and they're just not very safe. And I don't want them to be able to hurt you. So we're just going to choose not to go. And it's unfortunate, but they made really bad life choices and they hurt other people when it suits them. So you can still have those conversations and if you're coming from a place of abuse, it's hard. I think that one of the hardest things I do is try and my kids will ask me questions and they catch me off guard sometimes. And like most recently, my daughter is getting ready to be a tween, and she was excited about the idea that in just a few years she'll be able to have her permit. And she's like, but I get lost all the time. And she asked me how I always know cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Well, I always know cardinal directions because if I had, 2 seconds to jump out of the car and run at 2 a.m. and avoid being prostituted, I don't have polite words for that, then I would. And I needed to know where I was so that I could get home or get to some place where I could hide. And I just always did. And so I have this hypervigilance, and it's just the human body is a pretty amazing thing. Nobody had to teach me that, right? I taught myself. It's sink or swim. And how do you answer that, right? And I didn't have an answer prepared because I didn't foresee that question coming up. But you end up with these kinds of things, and I think the knee-jerk reaction or the knee-jerk tendency is to kind of make up an answer, right? Because how do you answer that question on the fly? And again, I end up stumbling. I don't have the language. I've got to think about, I know the answer, but how do I put that in age appropriate and developmentally appropriate language? And it's kind of a slap in the face, for me as well, because I didn't expect to be thinking about that all of a sudden. And she's just asking me how I know north, south, east, and west all the time. And I figured out an answer and I gave it to her, but I don't hide that from them. I gave her a very low level, vague, but truthful answer that it was a life skill for me.
Thinking back to what you said about your student, you said it broke your heart that your student thought that you didn't love teaching because she was seeing you struggle. And I was just equating that with motherhood. And I know that happens in my life, in my parenting. Actually today, I spent the day with my daughters out doing some stuff, and I was wearing my new glasses, which the prescription I'm trying to adjust to. And I apparently looked really kind of off all morning, that here I took them to try to do something fun. And we got home and one of my girls said, "Mom, you didn't seem like you enjoyed that, and you're not having a fun day." I'm kind of like, she was kind of almost apologizing for, "Mom, I'm sorry we were such a drag and we made you to go someplace you didn't really like." And and I said, "Oh, no, I've been wearing these glasses all day. That's the new prescription I just picked up yesterday, and it's not working out for me. It's made me totally tired, and I'm sorry. I think I'm going to go take a nap." How will, now, if I was not transparent in that to tell her why it was that I was struggling, that's going to start her in her heart struggling, thinking about the relationship between us. And so being, open and having these conversations and really sharing our heart, even when it's hard. I mean, your situation was much different than getting a new prescription, but still that need, it affects our relationships. And it's so good to be able to work through that and to have that openness to talk with our kids.
And I still haven't, my youngest is 12, so I still have a hard time saying this word myself. I haven't said the word rape yet. I don't think I say the word sexual assault because that's easier for me. But I don't think I've said that to them. I haven't gone into that detail, and we will get there eventually. But that transparency in all things. And I know lots of people think that, like, my husband he currently works with adoptions in child welfare, but he used to do casework with foster care situations and removals. And so between the two of us, we've seen plenty of what the world has to offer, either by firsthand knowledge or, I worked in public schools and he's worked that caseload. So we're pretty just aware. And I don't want to teach my children to mistrust people, but by having those conversations and being open about it and being transparent, and then when I start to struggle, because they're old enough that they notice, that something is off with mom, or, I'm fully aware that I can talk the hind leg off a dog, but I'm usually concise and I usually can string coherent sentences together. And if they ask me something that happens to be abuse related that they didn't realize, all of that goes out the window, because one, I'm trying to manage my own stress level, my heart rates elevated, which literally makes you dumber. I mean, you go from, being able to have rational thought to being more in a fight or flight stage. And then two, I'm really trying to think, it's like having your 3-year-old ask you where babies come from. You know the answer. Of course, you know the answer, but how are you going to make that understandable and truthful and accurate and, digestible for a 3-year-old? And that's quite a process. And when that's not having a baby and you're trying to break down sex abuse to that's quite a mental weight, so they need to know that that's not them, that's not their fault.
Molly, this is so good. And I know we could keep talking on and on, but we're going to have to wrap it up. But I want to give you the opportunity to say, is there anything else that we just haven't covered, but is really on your heart to share?
So I just really want to impress on people that, number one, you're not alone, right? And it doesn't matter if you struggle with sex abuse or physical abuse or, alcoholism, or everybody has a thing. Everybody struggles with something.
Man, you could be a mom who's like, I am pulling my hair out and I'm starting to scare myself. So be vulnerable and say, I need somebody to help me out.
Right. So just get help. You're not alone. You're not the first person I love John 3:16, and I can't remember which version it is, but the version that uses the word whosoever, right? It doesn't say, all of you who are perfect, or it doesn't, it's whosoever, and I'm whosoever. And so I think the second piece to getting help is we live in a time where biblical literacy is kind of at an all-time low, and people pass along platitudes, like God will never give you more than you can handle. But that is not what the Bible says, right? So if you're already listening to this, you're probably saved already. But I just want to encourage people to remember that, one, the church is made up full of humans, right? So people will say things and they'll be well-meaning and it will be 100% wrong. And and you need to be able to deal with that. But two, just keep going back to the word, because as people may suggest that, well, that was a punishment for God, or that was God's timing, whatever that, no, we live in a fallen world, and God's plan was Eden, and he made it and it was good. And then we sinned, and now it's not so good. Understatement of the year, right? But just to keep going back to the Bible, because it can be really hard, and I would say even more isolating, when we take that lack of transparency and that idea of perfection and then apply it to our lives spiritually, like we're not, somehow you're supposed to have lived through this and not struggle with it. And it's not biblical, it's not true. And so, get the help that you need. Keep seeking it, and you are not unique for being human and needing help. That is the human condition, right? If we could do it alone, we wouldn't need Jesus, and we can't do it alone, and we do need Jesus. Shall I pray? Shall we wrap that up?
Yeah, I'd love it if you would just pray to close us out.
Okay. Father God, I just thank you for this time and a good use of technology. And I ask that you would just please put your hand upon everybody that's listening. And if somebody needs help, that they would reach out and get it. And that if somebody knows somebody that needs help, that they would reach out and offer to help connect them and be a support. We are not made to walk this alone. We're made to walk it with you and with fellowship of the body of Christ, and that we would just be there for each other. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much for sharing your story, Molly. I know it was tough. I know it was messy, but I know that it was very good to hear, and that there will be women that are blessed by it. So thank you for sharing.
I hope that you've been encouraged or challenged in your faith today, and that something we discussed prompts you to grow deeper in your walk with the Lord. If it has, make sure you tell a friend so they can grow along with you. And if you or a friend would like to be a guest and share about God's faithfulness in your life, please email me at podcast@tendingfields.net. Because when we tell of God's faithfulness, we never run out of stories.
Whatever is true.